Pam pam. Suyicima le ngoma. Pam pam. Suyicima le ngoma. Pam pam. Dum da 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 pam pam. Dum da da ba ba. Dum da ba da ba bum ba bum ba. Dum da da bum ba ba bum ba. Dum da ba da ba ba. Bum ba da ba ba. He is my guest today. He is Bishop Joshua Maponga Yeshua Maponga. He is the founder of Farmers of Thought. Kwindawo noMaponga phakathi kuyacingwa ufamisha ngengcinga. Nangiqala uyiva lo concept. Ufamisha ngengcinga. He is a speaker, he is an author, he is a preacher. He speaks the unspoken. He argues the unargued. He challenges the unchallenged when he speaks. And today he is my guest, Kupat Kumafani Consulting, and I'm going to stay for an hour with Marara. And we're going to look holistically at the man he is, his origin, and why he's called Joshua Maponga III. Where is second and where is first? Okay, so that will also take us on a very nice journey of our conversation. Okay, so and we'll also look at his ministry. Abantu abaninzi abamaziyo uTata kaMaponga bathi, wow, you've not met anyone powerful like uTata Joshua Maponga. Okay, I want to know about that man today. And that's why I have invited him on SA Leaders. He may not be originally South African, but he's definitely African, of Zimbabwean origin. But however, we highlight him on SA Leaders because he dents the universe in the space of South Africa, in South African religions, South African religions, and that's why I thought he deserves an hour. He was my guest when we did The Woman with the Issue of Blood on the Saturday slot at 2 p.m. and we were together. And we, even there, Maponga spoke the unspoken, and God has blessed him, immensely with the ability to think beyond the borders of expectation. So those things that we expect, ICC, whatever ICC, whether it's Cape Town ICC or Sandton or Durban ICC or East London ICC, whatever ICC, we sort of have expectations of what they're going to say. But when you have Joshua Maponga as your keynote speaker, as your guest speaker, he then jumps beyond the imaginations of your expectations, and he pronounces on concepts and things that you never thought of. Mhlobowam Marara, good afternoon, and thank you so much for gracing Ipatko Mafani Conversations. On Thursdays, we host leaders, and please allow me to proclaim that you're one of the leaders that we are blessed to host this afternoon. Why are you called Joshua Maponga III? I need to start at the beginning. I know that you've been hosted on many platforms, but I just need to take one step before I take a couple of steps going forward.
On the low note to start with, thank you very much for inviting me to your platform. And I want to applaud you for the wonderful work that you have done during the season of Corona and keeping the spirits of the community alive, keeping the conversations alive, keeping hope alive, keeping faith alive keeping families alive, keeping the whole community of believers in a constant interaction and reflection of their faith. You may not get an accolade from the church, you may not get recognition from the organization for the amount of steadiness and steady hand you have carried us through during the difficult times of the coronavirus. We are now on stage 2, if I hear correctly, on the coronavirus. No one will write a report as to how people maintained their faith in phase 5 and how people kept their faith in phase 4, how people kept on holding on in phase 3. We are now on phase 2. Maybe another month from now, we'll be back on phase 1. And heroes are not mentioned. Heroes and powerful people are not remembered. When the liberation struggle of South Africa comes out, people talk about Nelson Mandela. No one talks about Chris Hani. No one talks about Langalibalele. No one talks about, Bungane. No one talks about the many other soldiers who died at Robben Island, in Zambia, in Angola, and in Tanzania. We tend to walk out of this liberation struggle with our banners holding on one man. And I just want, maybe just before we go any further, to recognize the great contribution that Mafani Consultancy has actually added to the moments of trouble during our liberation struggle. With those few words, I firstly want to thank you on behalf of Farmers of Thought, on behalf of UCA, United Kingdoms of Africa, on behalf of AIM, African Indigenous Movement, and on behalf of ZIM, Zimbabwe Indigenous Movement, of having invited us onto your platform to share and grow the African continent together. Who is Makonga Joshua? I discovered a few weeks ago that I actually don't have a name. I'm still waiting to get a name for myself. My grandfather's name was Maponga Marara, whose grandfather was Muchena. He named me after himself, that my name also would be Joshua also. His first name was Marara. Marara, which means rubbish. Rubbish, which means manure. The leaves that are falling off from a tree and are rotting in the ground as energy and manure for the next generation. So as I stand in front of you today, I don't have a name. I am named after my forefathers. I'm named after my grandfathers. And Muchena himself and Nokwara and Shoshe are grandchildren of Changambire, who are the great inheritors of the great Zimbabwe kingdom. Many of you would have known me as a pastor for the longest of time, but I think I kept it under the lips that I'm not just a pastor of the Seventh Adventist Church, as you know me, but I also have royal blood in me. Those of you who are spiritual could have sensed in the midst of my conversation that there was something much more in this man than just his face and good diction. My grandmother on my mother's side is a vendor, who are the Mbedzis from the greater Lemba tribes, Bomushali. My grandmother on my father's side is a Tembe, who are the Dubes. In South Africa, call them Bonambi, who is the great kingdom of the zebras from Mozambique. My grandfather on my father's side, on my mother's side, is a Mgonyama. Mgonyama, who are the great lions. And the Bunganes, the Abangoni, Amengoni from my mother's side. And on my father's side, they are the great Shoko, Vuzijena, Shoshe, Mbire, Changambire. In Malawi, they call us the Spiris. In Zimbabwe, we are the Shoko. In Botswana, we are the Kabo. In
South Africa, Ningamachawe.
And asikafika ndilinde kancane kwaNdebele basibiza ngoSikhosana, eMasuthwini basibiza ngoMuchweneng, Bochwene, Mange ndingena pha e-Eastern Cape kalokho bandibiza ujambazi, ulisa,
Oh yeah, umfene,
uhlathi,
uhlathi.
uweliliwa ngomva. Yithina ke lapha. Masifika pha eNatal basibiza ngofakudze ke, eMaswati basibiza ngomtolo ke. Imfene inye. Impandla zemfene azikho enhloko zibonakala ngasezibunu apha. Then you know this is the monkey himself. So I'm actually, just to say the least, I'm a consolidation of the great monarchs, the tribal inclinations of the South. I am the embodiment of the amalgamation of the kingdoms of the East, the West, the South, and the North. My name, they call me Maponga, Ma, which is a feminine, Ponga, which is actually Ponga. Nga is knowledge, wisdom, and intelligence, and healing from the great Kemetic space. And I'm Ma, Ra, Ra, Ma, Ra, Ra. Ra is the great sun. Mara, the one who gives birth to the sun. So you want to interpret my name on African ethnography, or you want to interpret my name from the Sutu cosmogony, or you want to interpret my name from the African indigenous knowledge system. I am a child of the soil. And when I'm in the south, Mapungubwe is one of my kingdoms. Muchena in the east, Tomboshawa in the south, Zimbabwe in the north. So I am the cardinal compass of the South African monarchs and the South African kingdoms. I thank you.
You see, it's very important, Hlathi. Mna njengomuntu wase-Eastern Cape uzandivumela ndikubize ngesiduko sakho apha e-Eastern Cape uba ngaba ubuzalelwe eBhofolo, apho ndizalelwe khona mna, uyawuzalelwa ekhayeni laseMamfeneni, ohlathi, olisa, ojambasi. You see, it's very important le background uyinikayo, and abantu abaninzi abayazi into yokokuba not only are you a pastor and the son of the pastor, but that you are also royal blood. Ungumntu wasebukhosini. Now that becomes important because zikhona pronouncements ozenzayo wena and your colleagues in ministry zingaziqondi. Kanti zithethwa ngumntwana egazi, zithethwa ngumntana omgquba, zithethwa ngumntwana enkosi. I then want to link the two and say, njengoba ungumntwana enkosi nje, how did it then happen, Jambasi, that your father landed, or your forefathers landed in the ministry of the Seventh-day Adventists, of which you are also a pastor? Not just a pastor, but a pastor, allow me to say, extraordinaire, who pronounces on things, and abantu bashiyeke with their jawbones dropped because of the amount of wisdom and the profound nature of the things that you say when you have that microphone in your hand. One of your trending sermons is "I'm not the man," which you preached, Estasa, many years ago. So how did it happen? It makes very interesting content for me. The mixture of royalty and ministry, to be able that your forefathers and your fathers proclaim the Lord Jesus as our Savior and Lord and the soon coming King. Ndincede apho ke Hlathi undinike lo background, then we will move forward with our conversation.
Inkonzo yasesabatheni ibe nenhlanhla kwakhona. A great privilege, I must say, to have a Levite from the tribe of Levi, to have royalty encapsulated, called and invited into the greater space of ministry, to serve under the echelons of the Adventist Church. My grandfather, there was a war that took place in the royal palace of Shoshen, where my grandmother had a son. And there was, in the olden days, kings would kill their sons, if they are old enough to make sure that they don't inherit the throne. So my grandmother, being in that space, discovered that her son, Marara, was going to be killed. And she ran away with the son to move further into a place they call Masringo, further down in Kwashowono, they call the place Chinango, where she brought up her 4 sons. And while there, then they were building the construction of the Great Mutirikwi Dam, which is one of the biggest lake in the world, called Lake Kyle. And he was working there. My grandfather, actually, shocking enough, there were people there who were from KwaZulu-Natal, and some of the people that Mzilikas brought with him to Zimbabwe were Xhosa people, the Fengos. They call them Mama Fengo. This includes Bolupepe, for example. This includes
Dlamini.
And my grandfather actually could speak Xhosa fluently. And I remember as a young boy in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s, and when he gets angry, he would actually swear and curse us in Xhosa, you know. And he grew up with the Xhosa people. So
ungabi samlinganisa, miyeke ungabi samlinganisa uba wayesithini kuni, ndiyawazi amaXhosa kwelo cala. Pawu! iWest yayingamamfengu la ayeseZimbabwe, yayingamamfengu apha emaXhoseni.
Ubekhipha inhlamba ngempumulo kaloko. So my affiliation and love for the southern kingdoms was actually instilled in me way before I could meet Fengos and where I could meet the Zulus and the South African community. It was at Lake Kyle in the early 1912, 1913s and 15s when my grandfather was actually working in the building of the Lake Kyle Dam. And we thought my grandfather was born in 1912, only to discover in 1985, 86 that he actually went to get his ID. And the year he registered his ID, that's when he registered that he was born in that year. Because on one of his archives, he starts to tell us that when Mzilikas came to Zimbabwe and they were coming to invade the Shona kingdoms, his grandmother put him in a basket and ran with him in the mountains. Now, that almost puts the history around the 1864s, 1863s, 1865, 1868. So if he could remember that history at that time, it almost throws his birth date with another 5, 6, 7, 8, at maximum 12 years old. So, and I lived with him, who died way after I had become a mature man. So it was at the building of Lake Kyle in the 1912s, 1913s, 1915s, in the 1925s, that the missionaries from Solusi Mission came to Masvingo, and my father my grandfather, Marara himself, accepted the Adventist faith. And with the money that he had collected from the building of the Lake Kyle, he bought himself a farm in Bikita. That's when my father actually comes into the picture. Because by the time my father comes into the picture, my grandfather had already accepted the Adventist message as of the 1925s, the 1935s, thereabouts. And he was a polygamous man. There's nothing to hide about that, because he was a cultural man. But he became an elder and started actually to do the greater reformation of the Masvingo region as a pastor. And from where I'm standing right now, I want to recognize him as a pastor in his own right, because the entrance of the Adventist knowledge system into Bikita, he was quite instrumental with such stalwarts such as Mr. Lunga, Mr. Chiduza, Mr. Tinofirei. I remember good people like Mudzengis, the Madembos, and the big stalwarts. You mentioned those names anyway in the law field, and these names pop up. So my grandfather was a boiling station of that information. What was funny is that when they gave him the Bible, his wife, who could not read and write, he taught her how to read, and she could read the Bible. So they started to implement the Bible according to what they understood. So I remember when I was born in the early 60s, early 70s, my grandfather telling me to go to the fields, pick up corn on the east, pick up corn on the west, pick up corn on the north, pick up corn on the south, go to the center of the field, put all these mealies together, put them in a basket. Please take these mealies with you and go and give them to a pastor. So my grandfather was actually practicing Hebrew faith. If he brought water to his household after sunset on a Friday, that water would have to remain outside his homestead for the rest of the weekend. Fires were put off and put out at sunset on Friday, and he would begin to sing songs. Sitting behind his chair there. So I grew up looking at this old man who had such a profound faith and understanding in his Hebraic roots. And he was not just practicing by words. There was something in his eyes and in his reflection that actually recognized that what he was doing was part of himself. So that the Hebrew culture in its practice became part of our homestead. And my father then picked up and became a literary evangelist who started selling books. Later on, he recognized a pastor in his own right, but he left me with my grandfather. So my infancy and childhood was actually shaped by this old man, born in the 80s, with a strong understanding of cultural knowledge of the 16th and 17th century, which integrated Adventism in the early 19th century and trying to build a new dispensation into the 19th century. I was caught up in that wing, so that my knowledge system of cultural information with Christian colonial information, and on top of that, the Adventist knowledge system is not coming from a vacuum of a boy who repents on the sides of, I will take you through later on how my father and his brother begin the greatest movement in Zimbabwe called the Zunde movement, which ended up in resulting in Zimbabwe, Central Zimbabwe Conference being recognized as the highest soul-winning conference in the whole world of the General Conference, and how they achieved that objective. And that I was one of the lay preachers in that organization. Later on, when I accepted the call, I did not accept the call to become a preacher from a call, but I was already building. Before I could become a pastor, I'd already run crusades and campaigns, baptizing a few hundreds. So it was a transition from my grandfather to my father to myself. I need people to understand my background fundamentally, so that when they hear me talking, and hear no mafikizolo.
But I'm worried that I'm not sure if back in Zimbabwe, the contribution of your father and the contribution of your grandfather was recognized. And even Willie Tafadzwa Chinyamurindi writes to say that if we would have a From Genesis to Germination Zimbabwe edition, it would be littered with so many great stories of the Maponga clan influence. Sadly, this history is not even recorded, yet alone acknowledged. How does that make you feel? Because as I listen to you now, and I'm trying to imagine, and you'll help me with this, the population of Zimbabwe should have a big percentage of the people that are in the Adventist movement, thanks to your father and your grandfather. Are you worried about the fact that, or perhaps have you got any expectation in terms of the recognition of those great men, you know, who brought this wonderful movement into the land of Zimbabwe?
It is painful to acknowledge or reflect backwards as I sit in the academic institutions of Zimbabwe, training now to become a pastor. because the background was strong enough. I am from the family of the Levites. So it was not a recruitment into ministry. It was a transition, a handover of ministry from one generation to another. Through the Zunde movement were a few lay people. This one would bring a pocket of peanuts, the other one a pocket of mealies, the other one a pocket of beans, and they would meet in a neutral place. And then from Tuesday, we would begin to preach around the communities around there. If we found a man plowing, we'd plow with them. If we found a man tending cattle and tending skins, we'd join in what we're doing. And we share the gospel. We share the gospel. And then on the evening time, we invite all of them to come around and we do a prayer meeting. And we preach the gospel, maybe in a school, maybe under a tree, maybe in a chief's scroll. By Friday or so, we would have collected maybe 20, 30, 40 people who are accepting the Adventist message. We do a big sermon on a Saturday with the baptism in the afternoon. Then one or two of us would remain at the place to build up a cellular group sort of thing. With the support of the other Sunday people, a church will be found, a classroom will be procured, a school hall will be procured, or a rental will be procured. Then a branch was established. This is how Adventism started to grow in Zimbabwe. I was part of that initial movement as early as 1978, 1979, into the early 80s. I was part of that.
The foundation of the Adventist movement in Zimbabwe was based on social justice. There was intervention programs. You found people working, you joined them, you helped them with whatever they were doing. And in the process, you won souls.
Yes, but this was the second wave. The second wave came in the early 1900s in the building of the Solusi Mission Institution in Bulawayo, and then the Lower Gwelo Institution, and the Hange Mission, and the Inyazura Mission, where the Adventists were coming from Cape Town and Kimberley, moved into Zimbabwe with people such as Sparrow. Unfortunately, one of the girls who was insulting black people to be like monkeys, she's actually one of the Adventist kids, the pioneer kids, the Sparrow girl in Poshepston. Their grandfather was actually one of the founder members in Zimbabwe. What a shame that even in the turn of the 20th century, the grandchildren still would not recognize Africans as human beings. But that's a conversation for another day. I would park that on the side.
Yeah.
So the first wave we find was that when Adventism came into the country, it used the academic influence in the country and building of mission stations, academic institutions. And so that was in the early 1920s, 1930s, into the 1940s, the building of those academic institutions. So them again having a missionary understanding, they were still depending on an organizational structure, and the organization thinks what the members must do. But by the late 70s, the members had fully accepted the message and they took the mission upon themselves to begin a vigorous, hands-on mission to distribute the message to the entire community. So my father does not come on the first phase, and my grandfather is on the first phase, but my father comes in on the second phase, where we're now beginning to say, what can we do as laymen to spread the gospel around the country? And one day I'm sitting in a classroom, training to be a pastor in the late 80s. And one, I will not mention the name, some of you might know him. He looks at me and says, your father is Maponga, he's a dissident who is not believing in returning tithe to the conference because he's telling members to run around the whole conference preaching the gospel in an uncontrollable fashion. So I went through my academic training actually being called the relegate of the institution. I won't mention much, but I was suspended from my pastoral training institution twice, if not 3 times. I was chased away from school for fighting social justice in the institution. And saying, because one of the academic professors actually came up with the concept that Africans don't need Hebrew and Greek. They're just good enough to be taught Daniel and Revelation chapter 14. They must go back and preach, and etc. And I took offense in that. Bearing in mind some of the staff members were misbehaving morally And I took condoms. I went to town. I bought a bunch of condoms and I put them in all the staff members' offices that they should stop immorality and etc. So my struggle with the system is not now. By then I was 16, 17 years old when I already could sense the amount of injustice that the system was happening. That was the first time I came in face to face with our honorable president, Solomon Maposa and Richard Stole. And may he so rest in peace, Hezekiah Mafo. And another man is Datu Maheti, who were my boarding masters at high school. They can tell you my interaction and my instilled resistance to injustice as early as the age of 15, 16, and 18 before I could graduate with my first degree at the age of 19.
Marara, now that's something. That's something. To graduate at the age of 19 in South Africa, we matriculated. Deal with that one some other day. In terms of the education, system.
At the age of 19, I had my first 4-year degree in my hand.
That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. Was that according to the system in Zimbabwe, or it's just that you were exceptionally good, such that there are standards or grades that you did perhaps in 1 year? You know, there would be learners that would do 2 grades in 1 year, and the next year they're doing another grade and another grade, and just like that. So I'm glad that we've cleared that. I needed to ask you.
I was a nuisance. My mind was slightly faster. So
yeah. No, I can say that.
1 or 2 grades I was made to jump over here.
Yeah, I can see that, lad. And it sort of brought about child abuse in your presence with the other learners because they could not keep up with the pace, I can imagine. But I also wanted to talk about your early ministry days, or even before you got into ministry, man, when you were growing under, this great legacy of Marara Maponga the first, and then Marara Maponga the second, and then yourself. When you were growing up, being groomed, I needed us to talk about 2 things. One would have been elements of vulnerability. And you've touched on this a little bit, that you would even be expelled at school because of this and that and that. And then the other one would be the opposite of that. Hey, Hlati, when you preach, it's like you don't even need a copy of the Bible in your hand. It's like the Bible in memorizing and yonke. Is this part of what genetically these great leaders left with you as a legacy, the Mapongas before you, or is this what Zimbabwean institutions would require of a young minister, to know the Bible from cover to cover?
I was born in 1969. And by the time I was born, my father had already been in the ministry for 1 year. So, and he was in the literature evangelism ministry. So the Bible story, bedtime stories, story time for Africa, To Heaven, To Hold, Modern Medical Guide, and etc. Those were my toys in the house. I was pushing books as toys in my house. I was born in a library, so to speak. And by the time I was the age of 5 and 6 and 7, I was actually helping my father to pack his literature evangelism bookcase so that he can go and sell. I paid for my school fees through college, through the process of selling books and subsidizing my own school fees. The church did not take me up as a full-time student. They refused to do that. But early, I remember in camp meetings in Zaka, camp meetings in Bikita, when I was taken and put on a chair or on a table, and I was asked to recite or preach or share the gospel, then at a very early age of my life. So I have not memorized the scriptures. I have not tried to, cram or impress people. What I share is what I know, as I have actually become part of my system, to say the least. So my experience in the Greater Adventist Church is not a Sabbath school teaching. It's not an afternoon Adventist teaching. It's not a Pathfinder teaching, but it is actually a hands-on, come with me, my son, let's go and work. And while my grandfather is doing it, I actually got also to have the impetus, the software and the knowledge of how this task must be done. So when you hear me preaching, I'm not here to be sharing notes with you. I'm actually sharing my personal experience. Before the gospel is said to the people, the gospel should have worked on you first. So preparation in privacy prepares you for distribution in public places. If you have not been to the private space of private conversation, you are not yet ready for public appearance. So those tools for me of internal private conversation became far much more important than public appearances. And people call me sometimes and say, Mfundisi, akuvele nje ubathi fatu fatu kancane nje ubathi fatu fatu fatu. And I got offended because to them it's about just appearing and doing something quickly and getting out. But in my preparation, it has nothing to do with calling Maponga J for a funeral or for a small little skit, for a small little demonstration and a few words. It's about the internal experience of what this passage done to me and how am I sharing it out with the next audience. So
now, right there. Now you're talking to me. And you're going to help me with my TV concept. You're going to help me. I have a TV concept called Father and Son. You are a product of that concept. Whilst South Africa bleeds from gender-based violence, abuse of women and children, and all of these things, and some of us, due to societal pressures, found ourselves committing errors like that. But the question we should be asking today is, Dada, do you know where your boy child is? Are you playing a part in shaping your boy child? Son, where is your father? And how much role is he playing in your life? Now you're talking to me when you talk like that, because I've been asking myself, the knowledge engaka ye Bible when Maponga preaches. And now I'm answered that this knowledge is actually a product of a concept called father and son, where father holds son by hand and walks the way with him, because izinto ezifundiswa ngomlomo, they are not as deeply impacting as ukuhamba emanyathelweni, walking in the steps. And I'm glad that you brought that out. I've discovered the royalty factor. I've discovered the transition factor from royalty to ministry. I'm discovering the father and son philosophy in your journey, which today, Tina, we are the beneficiaries of that. When we listen to you, we actually are not listening to somebody who burnt the candle the whole night trying to understand the book of Mark. But we are listening to somebody that was taken through the philosophy of father and son. How important it is, Klat, that every man listening to this broadcast plays a part in the life of their boy child.
I would not absolve my father totally from negligence at the hands of the church. The only advantage my father had was his father, who was my grandfather. Because when my father accepted the calling for ministry, particularly liturgy evangelism, it took him away from the house. And he was working in Triangle, in Chirevi, in Hippo Valley, with students such as Utata Umtakane, which many of you grew up under his hands in Bethel. If he was awake today to say when he was in Zimbabwe, who helped him to pay his school fees, my father's name will come up on the line. I would not hesitate to mention Utata Usbaya, Ubabaka Dennis Sbaya, who is still alive. You can confirm that. So I remember a few students who came to sleep in my bed and I had to sleep on the floor while they were learning how to sell books and create school fees for themselves at Solusi Mission in Zimbabwe. This includes people, big people, Dr. Masuku, for example. He was a student of my father. This does not even exclude men like Ngwaru himself, the one who wrote a letter to me a few days ago telling me that I must excuse myself from the ministry. He's a student of my father. So I'm not saying these things as a relegate boy sitting on the sidelines. I have seen hundreds of students going through my father's hands in terms of that training. The advantage my father had is that my grandfather was solid. So when he was busy doing God's work, he dumped me with him while he was working for the church. So once in a while, he would come home for Christmas, for holidays, for Easters, whatever holidays the white men had given him to come back home and see us. And it's painful that I could actually remember one holiday when my father came home with this is personal, but I'll share it for the purposes of growth. My father comes home one holiday and he brings a pair of shoes for me. And the pair of shoes was an old size because the last time he was with me, I was a size 4. And when he came back on the next leg, I was now a size 6. And the shoes that he bought were a size 4. And those shoes could not fit into me. It was a beautiful pair of shoes. It was bluish with leather front, beautiful pair of shoes. And I remember as a young boy, my heart was in pieces because that pair of shoes had to be taken away from me and be given to my young brother because my father could not remember. My father did not know what pair of shoes I was now putting on. I don't want to blame him. He was busy with God's work. But while he was busy with God's work, the children were growing on the sidelines. And I happened to be that child. And I look back and I say, the father-child relationship must be maintained. That in the midst of theology, eschatology, parousia, we don't forget the fundamental value of actually looking after our children in the now while we are busy trying to manage and maintain and proclaim the latter. I will not confess with less of words that some of this excitement about the second coming of Jesus also had a direct impact on me. And while on that, I need to mention that towards the mid-70s, my father became politically conscious, very conscious. He was the Secretary General of the Lawfelt in Zimbabwe, where he was now doing fundraising, collecting money and collecting resources for the Mozambique guerrillas who had gone to fight for the liberation of the country. I remember nights on end, sitting under our room with blankets covering our heads, listening to Radio Maputo at low volume because the soldiers were walking around so that they could not hear what was happening around. My father was picked up and they found out that he was a Secretary General and they put him into prison in Buffalo Range, late 1976, just after the explosion of the 1976 in South Africa. And he was put on the death row in Zimbabwe. I remember very well.
And he was a pastor still.
He was a pastor, but he was a political activist. So he was dumped in prison. Yeah, and I remember very deeply.
How important is this? Because it worries me that sometimes we jump over and we skip matters of social relevance or socio-political relevance and significance because we are obsessed with being religiously correct. And while in the process, it erodes our spirituality. How important is it that even when we are pastors, but that we are politically relevant, we're politically aware, we're politically correct, and we use our social influence to advance matters that disadvantage people politically. I mean, there was an outcry just recently of history sakwa cliques, racism, and how important is it that kuni befundisi kuphume statements of condemnation on issues such as racism. And are we doing justice before God as ministers when we wink at matters of social injustice?
I would leave the sentiments to the structure. I want to mention the damage to the children, and I do so deliberately so that I don't become a social commentator, but rather I will become an archive of social damage. When people hear me talking and writing and they say, Maponga, you sound very angry, you sound very hurt, you don't sound forgiving, you are damaged goods, and they say all these damning things on my face. I wish I could sit one day and with a group of young people and share my tears with them. That for 3 to 4 years, you see your mother riding a bicycle, going to prison with a piece of chicken and a small little lump of vegetables and a small little piece of pap to go and give your father, whom you don't know if you will see him again.
No, but when you talk about your father whom you don't know, it hits right at home. And next month, by the 6th of October, I need to make this announcement right here in the conversation for the benefit of the people that are with us. My book will be launched. It is entitled Patko Mafani, the Price and Prize of Greatness. It takes you on a life journey of weaknesses, of vulnerability, of poor social conditions, of poverty, and it takes you through the life of a lifestyle of disobedience and a lifestyle of blunders and mistakes, and going beyond this and still achieving things that one wanted to achieve in life. And that's why it's entitled The Price and Prize. And the prize being all this decoration of awards, and all the awards that have been blessed to win in my career, particularly on broadcasting and on sports marketing and all of that. The one aspect that the book will reveal to the world and to South Africans is the fact that I grew up not knowing my father. I grew up, so when you touch the situation of somebody who does not know his father, and in terms of vulnerability, that's a serious aspect of child development, because a child has got to look up to somebody. So I grew up with my uncles, Nabutatum Kulu, from the mother's side, and that's it. And they groomed me into what I am. But when the book is launched, it will reveal Ugututatam Wakwabani, Utatam Wakwabani, and so that Bonga Bobantu Bazas Banga Bantu Basekaya Bantu Bam is going to be exciting. It touches me what touched you. It touches me what you talk about, because it spells vulnerability, and sometimes we wonder why boy child behaves the way he does. Have you found your father? So in your story, I get to see the opposite. I get to see the power of father and son grooming. And in a nutshell, my book says, if I had grown under my father, I probably would have committed half the mistakes I've made in life, If I had grown under my father, I probably would have doubled the success that I have seen and people have seen in my life. So what you're telling me about your father and your your great father, and the fact that that was your first university that groomed you into becoming the person you are, this wise man, this eloquent man, this truly speaking, I wanted the conversation to do a different story about Maponga, not to do the story that everybody does.
Yeah.
And the things that you've said, they have actually touched the foundations of my being.
I want the Christian community, when they listen, or when they see me and I pass comments about white supremacy, I pass comments about the white iconography, I pass comments about the white Jesus, I pass comments about colonialism. I'm not speaking from a vacuum. I'm not speaking from a vacuum. I'm looking at a system that has damaged me. If you want to look at me as damaged goods, it's okay. Then grow from my damage and do something, think something, act on something that is much better. But I cannot be sitting here at the age of 52 and in reflection of a beautiful message, and yet people want to keep it couched and protected by a damaging environment. We needed to start separating between the truth that saves people and the obsession that destroys people. I will not, and can I be frank with you? And I'll say this painfully again. I'm sorry for breaking down, because you're my brother. I have nothing to hide from you. And this conversation is between me and you. The day I told you at the airport that I was leaving the church, you flew from East London, from Port Elizabeth, and you set me down. You took time out of your schedule to say, Maponga, don't say this. You can't say this. Let's work on this. And even then you did what you did on the basis of your brotherly understanding. But I think today raises the conversation to a totally different level, where I don't want you to second guess me, or to even in my absence. I don't want you to say you can't say that, you can say this. You will have a clear picture of what you're dealing with. I'm talking to a brother here. When I say the stuff that I'm saying, it's coming from a good place. It's coming from a beautiful space of an in-depth of understanding. If my father spent 85, if not 90 years of his life in the ministry, and my father spent 50 years, if not 60 of his years in the ministry, and I have put 33 years of active ministry and another 18 on top, make another 50 years. You're looking at about 180 years of Adventist bloodstream running in one conversation. With that understanding, we want to say, what is it? Where are we coming from? Where are we? And what can we do better in terms of taking this understanding to another level? And our history, which would value people more than doctrine, would give us more return on investment than a doctrine and a church that values systems above people. I am saying people are more valuable. If I should find a church manual and a human being burning in the furnace, I would say I would serve the person first before I start serving the manual. But many of us think that by protecting papers and destroying people is valuable.
He is my guest on the conversation, and he is Joshua Maponga. Because of time, I want us to. I cannot believe it's already 5 minutes to to 7. It's amazing. I want us to talk about farmers of thought. I when I first heard about farmers of thought a couple of years ago and read the book So You Want to Be a Master, a lot went into my mind, and my life was never the same again. How did farmers of thought come about, and what was your objective? What were you trying to do? Who were you trying to talk to with farmers of thought? This entire philosophy or phenomenon called farmers of thought. What is it about, and what's the background to this?
Because I was brought up by my grandfather, a Seventh-day Adventist, who was also a farmer. And so I grew up in the space of the agricultural environment. So many of my illustrations and conversations are linked up to the practical models of farming. So I decided to pick up 3 estates. The first, and all of them grow grass on them. The first estate being the estate of the mind, with the hair that is on your head. The second estate, which is between your legs, with the pubic hair that grows between your legs. And the third estate being the ground, with the grass that grows on it. And then I paralleled. This is as early as 2005, 2006, when I started conceptualizing this idea that maybe these 3 estates are actually connected one to another. The first estate, which is the mind, the quality of the crop, the farmer of the crop, the weeder of the crop, and the harvester of the crop. What is happening in the African mind as an estate between your 2 ears. The second estate being the one between your legs. What kind of children are you planting? And if you're a woman, what kind of ground are you? And what quality of farmers are you allowing to come and farm on your piece of estate? That speaks of posterity, reproduction, and continuity, inheritance, and heritage. The last estate being the estate underneath your feet, that is the soil itself, which is a political piece of estate. And right now, the political environment is established on the third estate, which is the ground. And we are fighting for the land. But while we are fighting for the land underneath our feet, are we in control of the land between our legs? And while we are protecting the land between our legs, which are our children, are we in control of the land between our ears, which is our software? Hence my very famous statement I always say, when the face is beautiful and the software is not working, the land between the legs will always suffer. Similarly so, when a country is beautiful and the thinking of the country, the political thinking of the country, the economic thinking of the country is not working, the resources of the country underneath our feet will always suffer. So farmers of thought seeks to take an African child and introduce them to the 3 estates: the estate of the mind, the estate of reproduction, the estate of inheritance, which is the real land itself. And you cannot give a South African land underneath their feet when they don't have control over land between their legs and land between their 2 ears.
And that's where it is. That's where it is. And so the balance of the software determines everything hardware wise. The healthy state of the software determines everything, and what you put into the software as well, because there are many things we feed the software about. Some feed the software on pornography, some feed the software on books, some feed the software on politics, others feed the software on sport. Farmers of Thought is about developing this software to save the rest in the hardware that I am and that people see. Marara Joshua Maponga is my guest, and I want to believe the time is 7 o'clock. It is obvious to me that we have to have a part 2. It is obvious to me that an hour is not enough. I do want to ask you to avail yourself perhaps next week, Thursday, same time, same place. I've got a couple of things that I wanted us to develop as we're having this conversation. I am attracted to people who are perceived controversial sometimes because they don't read from the same script that we have written. So some of us have written a particular life script, and we expect people to read from that script. And when they don't, then we label them controversial. I do want that we have a part 2. I'm interested in what makes Joshua Maponga powerful. I'm not interested in what makes others weak, but I'm interested in what makes Maponga powerful. Because from that, we probably can have a better particle. We probably can have a better Chuma, Buhle, Moki, Mhlangovuyo, Kanya, Imbo. I'm mentioning all of my boys, you know. So this is my interest. My interest is us developing men and young boys who will look after this software for South Africa to change, for the church to change, because that's another institution probably that does need to change from time to time. And so let us agree as we end this one that we have a part 2. And abantu ababukeleyo bonke hlathi bayangqina into yokokuba upart 2 ubaluleke kakhulu, that we come back and bayabulela abantu hlathi xa ndinokufundela nje messages apha uLuli Masimini uthi besigruza isisu sam namathumbu namhlanje because of izinto ezinkulu kangaka ezithethwayo apha. We have a date next week Thursday, same time at 6 p.m. and Bishop Joshua Maponga will be my guest, and we'll continue with this conversation. And allow me then to say thanks for today, and maybe for the part that we've done, you may want to reflect on one thought from your farm, on one thought as a parting shot. Please do that, and then see Vale.
Never allow your estate of your mind to become a leased property to illegal immigrants who plant foreign plants on your mind. For whoever plants on your mind has a right to harvest from it, and the quality of your seeds determines the quality of your harvest. I thank you.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, he is Joshua Maponga. He is my guest on the Pat Kumafani Conversations. We do it again next Thursday. This is September 11, tomorrow. Today is September 10. Tomorrow is September 11. And so these are the kind of dates that are scary to other people. September 11. But we're going to be doing it again on September 17. On September 17, we're going to be doing it again. 2 of my boys are born during around that time. September 17, Umogi. September 18, Ubuhle, the chef, the sound engineer, the copier technician. These boys have interesting things to work at in life. So September 17 at 1800 hours, it's a date. Thank you so much, South Africa, Africa, and the world. Thank you for joining us. Be good. Hlathi, enkosi kakhulu, siyabulela Jambase, siyabulela Lisa, kuwe wena owehla eliweni ngomva. Thank you so much.
Double A.
Thank you, sir.